All right, looks like people are starting to roll in here.
Mhm.
Welcome.
Well, hello. Thanks for joining.
Yeah, we can see who the on-time front of the class people are. Thank you for joining. Um, as people roll in, we're going to have a poll going here, just asking about what industry you're in. Oh, there it is. What industry you're in. This is a multi-select. So go ahead and do that. This will help us understand who we're talking to, just who's in the room. Um, multi-select and other. So if you do, you know, fashion that's specific to grocery, you can check both of those. I think anyone in general merch is going to click all of the above. There's no pets category. My standard joke, Michael, is whenever I'm making a joke about a company I want to start is sports jerseys for cats. I don't know where that would fit in here. It's definite other miscellaneous.
Other, for sure. Yeah.
Fantastic. We'll give it another minute and then we'll get rolling here. I'm not having cocktails. It's only noon here. I'm having coffee still. All
Exciting.
right. A little early for that. All right, let's get rolling here. So,
Yeah.
poll results. All right, a lot of other. Um, Pretty good breakdown, though. This is good distribution. Um, Good to see some of my grocery people in here, too. Just did a grocery webinar last month, I think. So, good to see that happening. All right. Well, welcome, everyone. Let's get going here. Uh, There we go. These are our beautiful faces. I'm Caleb Hanson. I'm the Director of Enterprise Accounts here at Signifyd. I've been here at Signifyd for a few years now. And, prior to that, my experience was in product management and really, um, figuring out one way or another, involved in e-commerce and figuring out how to make great experiences for people. Now working in fraud management, figuring out how we can help you get good customers through the process while protecting you from fraud, which is turn it over to Michael, introduce your role on that side.
Cool. Yeah. Thanks, Caleb. I'm Michael Pezely. I'm a Senior Director of Risk Intelligence at Signifyd. I've been in this role for about the past 2.5 years. I've really spent my entire career in the fraud and risk space dealing with all kinds of different challenges. But when the opportunity to join Signifyd arose, I really, just jumped at the chance. It's allowed me to, it was allowed for merging my skills and knowledge with like cutting edge machine learning. So I'm really happy I did. As a dedicated fraud professional, it's really allowed me to assist a broader range of merchants and tackle uh, the challenge of combating some of the most sophisticated transaction fraud around. So with that, we're going to dive into some of that today.
That's what we're here to discuss, and I can't imagine a better person to do it. Quickly, I want to do a shout out to our sponsor for this event, Shopify. So huge thank you for sponsoring this quarter's event. Over 675 million unique shoppers purchased from Shopify merchants in 2023. That is a huge number. Signifyd partners with Shopify to enable online retailers to provide a friction-free buying experience for their customers. What that does is, leveraging big data and machine learning and expert automation of fraud review, we can provide 100% fraud prevention and insurance and effectively shift liability for fraud for those Shopify merchants away from them over to us and make that protection real. That allows them to increase sales and protect revenue, open up new markets, focus on building their business while protecting themselves and reducing risk. So that's the basic concept there. Um, and so I want to, again, thank you, Shopify, for just being a great partner. Their unwavering support and commitment to that shared mission is huge. So we're really excited to continue that partnership and continue working together. Quick shout out to, as we get into this, there's the ability to submit questions. We would love that. So as we're going, just please submit those and we'll try to answer them in line if we can. All right, so starting here, there's been over the last 5 years or so, a really profound shift in fraud. And I think we're all seeing this. What was once primarily rooted in Eastern Europe and West Africa has now migrated to Southeast Asia. And that migration has been driven by various factors, although we're not going to delve into all of those here. But suffice it to say that that emerging landscape of scams in Southeast Asia is just staggering in scale, well surpassing those of the hotspots of the past. This number here that you're seeing up here is the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime recently provided this insight, which is pretty sobering. This is a conservative estimate of, and they referred to it as the revenue generated by criminal syndicates in one Mekong nation. When they say revenue generated, they mean for them, and this is fraud that is being perpetrated against you. Now, this unnamed nation's scam industry is believed to generate 7.5 to 12.5 billion annually, and that's nearly half of that country's official GDP in 2021. So we're talking about that level of fraud taking place. Now, that world has always been viewed as this dark underworld. But these groups are taking it to really unprecedented levels. Now, the UN estimates that over 120,000 individuals are being coerced into working in these scam centers in Myanmar alone, with an additional 100,000 or more in Cambodia. So that's a very dark side of this, as if the fraud and scams aren't bad enough. There's a real human impact here, and these are increasingly attracting attention from governments and law enforcement agencies as well. Outside of the region, you're probably hearing about this in other areas of the media. But as these criminal syndicates expand their reach, and we're not going to use the term fraudsters. It sounds very hokey. These are criminal syndicates. They're targeting victims worldwide, not only for this fraud activity, but also for human trafficking. And these scams do not seem to be slowing down, and this fraud does not seem to be slowing down. And in the views of the risk intelligence team here at Signifyd, it's only been on the rise, and it only continues to grow. Now, one of the things that's really interesting about this shift is their approach, right? This is probably the most profound piece of this is, previously you'd see a criminal organization, they discover a profitable attack vector for fraud and they leverage it. They use it till it dries up, right? When it's shut down, they'd iterate and they'd search for a new way around the new defenses that get stood up. But what we see in this new breed is more akin to cyber attacks. So we're seeing them collecting and testing and saving a series of these exploits. It's almost like the zero-day exploits that cyber criminals capture. And then they assemble them into an attack ladder. And a ladder implies, a set series, but really it's kind of a menu almost, right? That they can then leverage as this minimalist approach. And they use the least effort possible to defeat the defenses that are in place. And then they kind of move on as they do this. Now we're going to talk about that ladder, but we want to do so using the power of song. No, that would be awesome. No, we're not actually using song. We're going to do this through stories. So we want to share some stories that kind of illustrate different pieces of this. I think Michael, for a second there, did you think I was going to make you sing? It's going to be the next
panicked. One. Yeah, I did panic.
It's going to be the next one. For this one, we're going to talk about the moment, using the suitable for work version of this acronym, the moment the shoe hit the floor, I guess. I think we all know what it actually stands for. But let's start with the part of this attack that really got everyone's attention. And that's illustrated here, I think, really well. So in Q4 of 22, this fraud ring or series of fraud rings began targeting a large consumer electronics manufacturer that we work with, along with a lot of other large enterprise accounts. And that was strategically timed for the holiday season. Michael, what are we looking at here? What is this chart telling us?
Yeah. Yeah, great. So thanks, Caleb. Yeah, what we see here in this data is we're looking at the total GMV of orders attempted and what was actually approved by Signifyd for a specific cohort of accounts. This is not all of this merchant's traffic. Here we can see the start of what is a massive attack. And how big is it? Over the course of this entire campaign, we believe there was about just over 27 million in attempted transactions. And then the view that we're looking at, just the last 4 days on this graph represents about 13% of that total. And again, as you see on the screen there, during that peak, we recorded over $1,100 in attempted transactions every minute. And these were not like simplistic or low quality or automated attempts that one might expect to see. These were pretty sophisticated and at a volume we'd never really seen before. So we're definitely going to talk more about that throughout today's webinar. But as once this sort of shoe hit the floor, sorry, it allowed my risk intelligence team to really be able to create this attacker cohort, if you will. It's based on various signals that then allows our team to really start looking backward to see what was happening with this cohort prior to this attack truly like emerging. And what you see in that chart is that this group was active 4 months prior to that main attack. The amount of success you see there is very minimal, right? The approved GMV is almost at some points non-existent. So small, in fact, that it doesn't raise any alarms to us over that time. Essentially, what you're kind of seeing is our machine learning models, taking out these fraud attempts as you would expect. But knowing, what we know now, looking back, it's clear that this group was doing a form of reconnaissance. They were very methodically learning what worked and what did not, and building a playbook to use that information at a later time, and being very careful about not, sort of raising any suspicion. But when this attack did start, I would categorize it as one of the largest scaling and largest fraud attacks I've ever witnessed.
Yeah. So what did we do? How did we stop it? How did they react? To answer those questions, it's probably best to rewind a couple months, right? Let's go back in time. We're going to cop a title from a Sherlock Holmes case here and talk about a scandal in Bavaria.
Great. Yeah. So in this case, we're going to look at another consumer electronics merchant. So this merchant was based in Germany rather than the US, as the last one was. But going back to that attack ladder we mentioned, I would say that the first rung on that ladder is probably the usage of VPNs and proxies. That's clearly not a new tactic, but I want to include it here and then start adding some more rungs to this case, which is the next one being bots. That's a much bigger jump on the ladder. Proxies are very common in fraud. Bots, not necessarily as much. So using these tools and their knowledge of merchant defenses, which we will show like how fast one of these attacks can occur. So just an interesting note. This is also an indicator of how well they understand fraud management and how adaptable they are. And that'll be a theme throughout. But when merchants sometimes have a heavy volume, they might tend to let lower purchases through at a higher rate. Additionally, many defenses may have a bias towards higher value purchases. And here we saw a surge of fraudulent orders targeting very inexpensive digital items. Think like antivirus and remote device access software. So these low dollars orders were potentially more likely to be approved due to maybe a looser threshold at that price point.
Yeah, when you think about it, that consumer electronics, especially, like there's some very, very high dollar value purchases, right, that have traditionally been more risky. So
Yeah.
those low value purchases were very different from kind of the ones that you mostly have your eyes on. And yeah, let's
Yeah, so let's look
talk about
at
this one.
talk about this, like, site metrics, and this is one that probably a lot of you may be familiar with. So this chart represents kind of the average time in minutes that a customer spends checking out. This is from this particular merchant, and what we're looking at is prior to this attack taking place. And what you see is that most of these orders take several minutes to check out. Um, Now let's overlay a metric that occurred during the attack. So now you see this huge shift. A large number of orders are occurring in 1 minute or less. And this behavior and this volume was large enough to drastically change the overall metric for this site. Um, that change in order speed, along with other signals, help us to conclude that most, if not all, of this attack was scripted.
I mean, that's bonkers to the people who are on this call who are used to looking at this kind of site metric. To see that kind of a swing in your overall time on page just really speaks to the volume of this attack. And Michael, we've seen scripted attacks before, and the volume on this one is just, I mean, it's incredible. But what else was different? What really stood out here?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I mentioned a minute ago, but like the merchandise that was being targeted was somewhat unexpected based on what we'd seen from these groups in the past. And also, the automation that we were seeing didn't end with just the transaction. For those that were successful, we were informed that the digital product keys that were basically emailed to the buyers, these buyers, to activate the software, were being used within seconds of those emails being delivered, meaning they had no chance to stop or recall them once this email was sent.
Well, I think let's move on to this part. I think this is a really interesting piece of this attack as well.
Yeah, I think we're going to open a poll here for the group um, as we
Mm.
start to talk about this interesting topic here. So, um, based on the attributes of this attack that we've mentioned so far, it's difficult to attribute attack to like a single region or something like that. So, here you can see a heat map that shows the IP geolocations contained within the orders that we're talking about today. So I want to be clear that these IPs are not associated with VPNs. Like if you look at these IPs, they're not going to tell you, you're not going to see that they're part of a VPN. They sure appear like they are located with Germany, and they're spread out over the most of the country. You can see that heat map is pretty well covering Germany. And so this is another big factor that might keep risk lower in a traditional anti-fraud system. However, at Signifyd, we have more interesting ways to look at these orders from an IP geo. Using our sort of IP piercing techniques that exploits different methods. We won't go into all those to bore everyone, but we often find that the geolocation an attacker is presenting at the order level is not the real location. When we are started to examine that real IP location, we see a completely different picture emerge.
And it looks like, do we have so the poll went away. Do we have those results? Or, yeah, there we go. All right. So more than half of you can see the real IP address. That's good. Um, that's pretty key.
Yeah,
We'll talk about in a second here. You'll see why that matters.
definitely. So here's that same map, same period of time, but we are using the geolocation of the real IP instead of what is sort of presented at the order level. while you still do see some activity in Germany, that's the real traffic. But sort of a world away, we see a very small and very concentrated area pop up, which is Da Nang, Vietnam. Um, and these are, something that we would often refer to as a hidden proxy, right? Again, they're not a known proxy IP address. So in addition to using those hidden proxies, which is, a little bit more advanced than just a traditional VPN, another rung on that attack ladder is being shown off here, which is device spoofing, right? So this is a tactic that cyber criminals employ to trick systems or networks into believing that their device is authentic, new, of higher quality. It involves changing a device's identity to imitate another device. And so, this would be such a pretending to be a computer or a mobile phone that it really is not. So, for example, an order might appear to be coming from an iPhone or a Mac, but it's actually a Windows NT machine.
Hmm. You mentioned this ongoing theme that we're going to have throughout, but this is one of those instances where it indicates that they really understand our world. I mean, those devices, newer iPhone or Mac, those are generally considered safer, right?
Yeah, that's right. And I will also add to that they were very thorough. Some of you on the call may be familiar with things like browser languages. So they made sure to even update indicators like that browser language to make sure it was passing the right one, in this case, German. Um, and they also used aged email addresses, some set up years prior. And then set aside, for much later dates. So with this attack, all of these attackers planning really went into creating the code to automatically rotate through all of these hidden proxies, all of these different devices, credit card information, customer information, and the intent was to give the attackers the advantage of surprise, right? By the time your fraud teams realize something's afoot, it's already too late.
Mm. Yeah, I like the a foot. I like the Holmes
Yeah,
reference. Nice.
yeah.
Um, let's move on. I want to talk about another interesting tactic that isn't again relates to how well they understand our world. That's what this case is
Mhm.
largely about, right? Talking about smokescreen orders.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. This one is super interesting. There was a lot of talk around this and piecing this one together for a while within my group. So this is yet another sort of rung that we're going to jump here. So there's a lot of different methods that we've talked about so far, and indicating how they seemingly have a pretty good knowledge about how risk operations work or risk teams. And so this one's going to really kind of like, I think, knock some socks off here. So this case starts to show off the abilities group to, utilize reshippers or reshipping as a key part of their strategy, right? So I'm sure most on the call are familiar with reshipping businesses. But just in case, reshippers are businesses that will take delivery of a purchase and then forward it on to another address, typically an international address. Um, the reshippers these fraud groups use are most often, at least for Southeast Asia, most often located on the West Coast, and they often appear to cater, directly to Southeast Asian communities. Here on the screen, you see one of these actual storefronts that was used. Um, and just a quick note on reshippers, right? Reshippers are not inherently bad. Based on our own data, less than 1% of orders that go to known reshippers end up in chargebacks, right? So also we have no reason to believe that reshippers are willing partners. So just you might take a strategy to not allow shipping to a known reshipper, but I guarantee you will definitely be turning away a lot of good transactions in that decision. So, let's move on to another tactic here, Caleb. I know it's one that's
Hmm.
always near and dear to
Uh,
everyone's heart.
oh, it is. This one I could like feel people nodding as we talk about reshippers. I talk to merchants all the time who they see this part of it taking place. This one is also really, really common. Let's talk about address manipulation. I think everybody's seen some version of this, right? Where they're relying on the exact string match logic of a lot of those older fraud management tools. In some cases, the humans who are actually delivering the packages are part of the attack. They know where it's supposed to go. They can use their human brain to parse this address and actually deliver it to the real address, right? Um, Michael, what can we say about how we stop this one? I know there's probably stuff we don't want to say, but what can we say?
Sure. Yeah, look, we've as you mentioned, Caleb, like, this is a very common tactic, and here's a couple of examples. I think you see that the top is a pretty straightforward version of this address. The middle of that address has what we would refer to as a reshipper code, and then they get kind of a little bit weirder after that, using different cities, different states, and everything in between. I mean, I've seen two addresses merged together. You see all kinds of weirdness here. But at Signifyd, we've developed a number of data features that can normalize those attempts to obfuscate these addresses so that the endless variations will resolve to the same address. And we've also created models that can detect the level of address manipulation being employed versus just um, basic miskey or some other types of normal sort of differences that we've seen in address.
Mm-hmm.
And then even more recently, we've created some impressive geofencing features that I'm not going to say much about, but I feel that they're highly effective in the reshipper category.
I think that's the key thing is address normalization is one piece, but then detecting that this address manipulation is actually in play can also be really helpful, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of like using the tactic against them. Um, Moving on, this is
Yeah.
interesting. I like
Yeah, this is
this
where it
piece.
gets really interesting. So we've not forgotten that we titled this case, smokescreen orders. So let's really just dive into that. Um, as we mentioned, these groups are very familiar with how anti-fraud operations work. So here we're going to see a great example of this. All the items that you kind of see on the screen were part of a larger fraud attack. However, I'm sure a bunch of you are looking at this going like, what the heck, right? These items raise a lot of questions. There is clearly little to no value in these items. They're all less than $20. And what you're not really seeing in the slide is the volume at which these orders were being attempted. I mean, we're talking about thousands of them. So these, wait, before we go on, let's throw a poll up here. We got a poll, I
Mm.
think, to get engaged with you guys. So as that gets activated here, there we go. So these low dollar purchases consisted almost entirely of like one item per order and one order per delivery address. And these addresses were all over the map, right? So like, what is going on here? This is actually similar to something that we would call an email bomb. That's a tactic used to confuse an individual cardholder when a fraudster uses that cardholder's real email address to make a fraudulent purchase. They flood the victim's inbox, hoping they don't see that the email that they just bought an iPhone on the other side of the country. Um, with this surge of random low dollar orders, the intent here is to slow down your fraud team by flooding with volume. Depending on how you do things, many of these orders may end up in a manual review queue, or they just might simply trigger your risk teams to start investigating. The hope here is that it's a distraction and it will allow them more success with their actual target.
I wanted a quick tactical note here. I think it's really great intel, but what's the advice or the takeaway that people can kind of bring back from
Yeah.
this piece?
Yeah, I think, looking at the poll and seeing, what's going on here, fail open policies on a fraud review SLA can be dangerous.
Hmm.
An attack like this could cause that failure to open the gates to the orders that they were really hoping to get through.
And it looks like most of the people here have moved away from fail open on those reviews. And what this means is you've got forget the SLA, do the review, and a lot of people calling in reinforcements on manual review. So what this means is that these attempts they're maybe not failing open, but they're slowing down your teams. They're causing you to consume more resources, and they're still seeing success. They're able to then, kind of get through to the real targets, which I think is what we're going to talk about next. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool.
There you go.
All right.
So other
So
than paper towels,
yeah, so now as I mentioned, that this was an attack within an attack, so to speak, right? So as we start to sort through all these attempted orders, we start to see some additional items of interest with some different characteristics, right? So these are these additional items that were heavily targeted. However, unlike previous set that we looked at, these were not going to random addresses. We saw concentrations of individual orders on some of these items, going to the same residential addresses. And while a few of these items may seem odd or random to you, one of these items is probably the hottest targeted item across our merchants over the last 3 to 6 months, and that is these heaters. Um, so there is a demand on the fraud side to obtain all various kinds of space heaters. I
hottest
can't
item.
explain the chairs though.
Well, I mean, you're going to call those the hottest items, so I'll say, maybe they're just sitting on the inventory. um, we have so great question came in around this. Someone saying that they've seen those low dollar orders on high volumes due to card testing attacks. Is that a possibility here? Did we see those
I mean,
cards reappearing?
it is a possibility. But those we I could say that we did not see that those cards being used again
Mhm.
within our
Yeah,
network, right?
yeah,
So again, it could be, but again, the way that we kind of can go back and attribute and create these cohorts, and the timing of all this, maybe it was two separate attacks from very, very similar cohorts at the exact same
mhm.
time, but sometimes the more complex your answers has to get, the less likely it's the possibility there. So
Yeah.
yeah.
What about the other items on this list here?
Yeah, so another one here was somewhat interesting is the motor oil. So we saw close to 900 attempted orders for various brands and sizes being ordered. And again, these were not to random addresses. We observed dozens of these orders going to the same residential addresses. I just a fun fact, I put all of the attempted orders together uh, based on the amount of oil, and it was over 2,000 gallons of oil that was attempted to be purchased. But we want to get to what the main target was here. And you can see that by the high number of attempts. And that is these Milwaukee power tools. These are mostly the big bundles. They retail for, well over $500. And why do we think that was the main target? Of all of the items we discussed, only these power tools were being sent to reshippers to be moved out of the country. The rest
That's
were not.
that's very unsurprising. If the people on this call, if you talk to your colleagues in loss prevention, power tools and the battery packs for power tools are a top target for theft. just really hot items. And I think that's another interesting tactical note here. Um, Talk to your colleagues in retail loss prevention, the people who deal with physical theft in the stores. I'm always surprised at, sometimes how little communication takes place between those roles in some companies. And if the items are valuable to these criminal organizations, they're going to be using those different channels to try to get those items. So there can be some good intel sharing taking place there. Before we move on to the next, we had another question that I think is a really good one, which is, what is the purpose of address manipulation? Doesn't that just mean that the package gets misdelivered? And this is one where the criminal organizations have a really good understanding of the defenses that are in place, as well as the rest of the kind of operational reality around that. A lot of these fraud management tools use exact string matches. And if they have a block list on addresses where they've seen a lot of fraud, or a block list on someone that's a known reshipper, if that is a kind of literal string match, then they just have to manipulate the address enough that it passes through that list without getting flagged. And the UPS driver on the other side can decode that address and actually deliver the package to the right place. So they're relying on kind of the strictness of the fraud filters combined with the human intelligence on the other end to make sure the package makes it to its destination. Very clever, actually.
Yeah. Yeah, very clever. And just a tip here, of all the variations and types of address manipulation that you see, fraudsters still understand this most key concept, at least within the US, and that is the zip code. The zip code gets something close to its delivery address, and that is where you will never see any manipulation. That zip code string will always be perfectly intact. The rest of the address, fair game, but that zip code, that's what they can't mess with. So it's somewhat helpful. It doesn't solve the problem for sure, but just a tip there.
Moving on to from the shoe hitting the fan to if the shoe fits. This is a good one. We're going deep on shoes today.
Cool. So yeah, once again, I want to underscore the adaptability and resources of these fraud groups. In this instance, enterprise shoe seller, targeted delivery address belonging to reshipping companies. And our defenses were really strong. The success rate was very low, but rather than giving up, they really just quickly adjusted their tactic, right? So when the attack started, focus was on shoes under $100, right? So not high-end shoes. Initially, all the delivery addresses were commercial reshippers on the West Coast. And after one day or so of that very low success, the attackers pivoted in a way that's not super common, at least not at the speed at which we saw. So they basically completely abandoned these commercial reshippers, realizing it could be a vulnerability in their approach. Their new strategy, overnight, was to start to utilize residential addresses. And often they're using the same address for multiple orders. And this is like this house that you see on the slide, that address was seen in over 3,000 attempted orders. I mean, again, these are attempted orders. So, but could you imagine 3,000 separate pairs of shoes being delivered to this address? That's really something. Furthermore, they updated their IP addresses using US cellular networks on all their orders, right? So these IPs were located reasonably close to billing addresses, and it's pretty easy for them to place them that way. So that is adding yet another layer of authenticity to those orders. This group also utilized, again, this tactic that we haven't discussed too much in detail, but these are actually mobile proxies, right? So this is it's another level of sophistication and knowledge that these groups have of like what might be considered a good signal in the risk world and a bad signal, and mobile IPs are sometimes a better signal, and also the fact that they can, you know, really drop a pin, so to speak, really close to, um, order details, billing details. Um, it just makes it even harder to really trace their activities.
So I think that's a great segue. Let's zoom out here. We've talked a lot about the individual tactics on that ladder. I think this one is a great place to kind of talk about what that looks like holistically, right? When you put them all together, what does that mean for us, for you, for the people on this call?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's pretty crazy, right? So like, let's step back and look at that. You've got like a relatively low dollar order, right? Made with a US card, shipping to a US residence, placed by an iPhone on a US cellular network that is close to said address, and that address might be aged 5 or more years, and it's all fraud.
I mean, I think that's the kind of order that humans, even looking at it, would think is safe, right?
Yeah.
Pretty incredible. I think that brings us back. We can kind of circle back now to the beginning, the case that we were talking about um, when the shoe hit the floor, of that big peak in the attack that we saw.
Mhm.
So we've talked about all the tactics that they have to work with. Let's circle back to that. Um, Looking at this, we showed this slide, um, the moment that this happened, and really put these organizations on the map and made them a real contender that just couldn't be ignored. Um, let's zoom out again and look at the entire campaign, the entire timeline.
Yeah. I mean, to me, this is pretty incredible. So, we don't have a poll question here, but we probably should have put one in. How long does a fraud attack last? Right? Is it one day, 5 days, 5 weeks? How about 5 months? Right? Because that's what we see here. Um, because we were able to kind of create this, let's call it a digital signature for this group. It allowed us to keep a really good eye on what they were up to. There were definitely some changes here and there in their behaviors and approach, but in this view, we've taken all that into account. Um, and it's just crazy the amount of patience and resources that have gone into something like we're seeing here. This timeline shows a total attempted transactions coming in at just over $27 million. Um,
And this is just, I mean, what we're looking at here is this is not across our network. This is not across U.S. commerce. This is one merchant that we're talking about. I know that there have been differing numbers around. I think our best estimate, last I knew, was that across just U.S. commerce, not even EMEA, this is something like $1 to $2 billion in fraud being perpetrated or attempted, right? And I think what's also interesting here is, again, this is looking at one merchant that you can see we did a pretty good job of deflecting the fraud on. And so during that valley that you see in, kind of toward the end of the one year and beginning of the next, um, they stopped attacking this specific merchant, but it's not like they went away or like took a vacation. They were just elsewhere attacking other people, right? Like this, it didn't go away. It never went away. It's still ongoing, right?
yeah.
So let's come back to, we kind of showed, we teased at this concept of the attack ladder. We've talked through some of these tactics and how they're being deployed. The goal here is to kind of pick everyone's head up, like zoom out and um, show this entire ladder. I think a lot of what we heard, and again, I talk to merchants all day, every day, who are experiencing some part of this, and it felt like that old parable of the people in the dark room feeling their way around an elephant, and each person is feeling a different part of the elephant and trying to figure out what animal they're dealing with. That was what I was feeling from a lot of the merchants that I've been talking to over the last couple of years. So I think the part of the goal here is to, um, kind of give that situational awareness and then give people the ability to do something about it, right? So these are the main takeaways that we want to uh, bring everyone's attention to. We have a blog post on this on our site that we can link to. The first point is these Southeast Asian fraud attacks meant that we had to learn their playbook, right? And we also have to look at these trends at a higher level. Once you line up all of these attacks and their patterns and their commonalities to, kind of start pattern matching on that at a traffic level, some of the traditional signals that we've always used are no longer considered relevant at an order level. And suddenly you can kind of zoom out and you can find significance at the larger traffic level, right? Um, Large unexpected shifts in these signals have proved to signal a potential fraud trend, right? So you've got to kind of watch those things. The second point is that you have to pick up your head. Like I said, zoom out to the bigger picture, share the intel, talk with loss prevention, talk with, because it's all related, right? And share within the industry, share with each other. We're going to talk about MRC in a minute. That's coming up. It's a great chance to connect with other people in the space and share some of those patterns. The third point is, we've just talked about this. We talked about these past cases. We're not talking about this in the past tense, though. Yes, we saw and stopped a lot of this attack, but let's be real. These are entire organizations or networks of organizations. We're talking about the GDP of a country, right? That are built to commit fraud. This is the new breed. This is the new way of the world, and it's industrialized. They're not going away. They're going to do what cyber criminals do and have been doing for decades. They're going to go back and they're going to find more zero-day exploits. They're going to build a new set of playbooks, fast intervention through detection and prevention efforts, and finding a way to stop them and reduce the economic impact is the key here, right? The fourth point is, we'll be straight about this. The banks didn't stop these first attacks, right?
Yeah.
All of the stuff that you saw, those were all authorized transactions that were blocked after the auth attempt was successful. Most banks don't have the data or the technology, but they're going to try, right? And that's maybe problematic, which because they're going to try to block this with very little data, and that can mean over declining at auth. So watch for that. Do what you can to clean your auth attempts. Consider moving your fraud management pre-authorization to keep the traffic that you're sending through the network clean, keep your mid clean. And we're seeing more and more interest in that in the market, by the way, too. Almost every conversation I have with merchants now, they want to have fraud management sit pre-auth for, in part, that reason. So we move ahead here. As I said, we're going to be at MRC. It's a great chance to connect with others in the space. Come find us. We're happy to continue this conversation over a real cocktail, perhaps. I think we're going to have an interesting theme to our booth this year that relates. So come find us. Michael, anything else you'd say about MRC?
No,
You're
yeah,
going to be
just
there, right?
again, yeah, I'll be there. So, yeah, hope to see as many of you there as we can and continue these conversations.
Yeah. And Flow, especially for those of you on the East Coast, this is our annual conference that we do. It's not specific to the Signifyd product or offering. This is about getting people together who are e-commerce innovators, retail experts, fraud experts, and just talk about the place where all of those things meet. It's in New York on April 17th. I do want to cover, we had a couple more questions come in that I want to get to here. I think we still have 10 minutes or so. Is that right? Or are we at time?
I think we're almost at time.
Okay. One quick question that we got that I really wanted to address was around an increase in return fraud, calling out specifically the people who use a prepaid return shipping label, but manipulate it so that the package doesn't arrive, and if it does, it's an empty package, right? Have we seen a rise in this as well, and what can merchants do to protect themselves? Great question. Yes, there's a constant drumbeat of this problem in the industry right now. It's a very popular topic, and maybe one that we focus on in a future webinar. There's no easy answer here. This and I think the question here is this related, right? Is this related to these organizations? Um, and that's a harder one to answer. I think there's overlap, and then there's just also ordinary people engaging in bad behavior, being coached on how to engage in bad behavior. There's some commercial operations out there helping people execute return and refund fraud. So it's kind of all over the place. The truth is, merchants are getting hit on every side with fraud and abuse attempts. So the world is getting harder. On that happy note, I want to thank everybody for joining today, and also thank you, Michael. Really great to hear
My
about this
pleasure.
from the person who's in the trenches. All right, thank you all. Catch you next time.